Carl Jung invented an archetype which contains all the repressed psychological parts of a personality. He called it the shadow. In childhood, the shadow is mostly developed. Society, your parents, and you yourself regulate upcoming impulses. Only what is acceptable for the listed instances and many other factors can be successfully integrated. The other psychological impulses will be repressed. Repressed parts can, for example, be aggression, sexuality, as a man showing feminine traits or as a woman showing masculine traits, and so on. But the shadow can also contain positive aspects, like showing affection, being moral, merciful, forgiving, loving, etc. Since the shadow contains all that is repressed, it is also the storehouse of your disowned potential, containing everything you need to become whole. It's a lifelong task to successfully integrate your shadow. In this series, we will take any fictional character and try to uncover his or her shadow journey. Jon Snow was the leader, the rightful heir to the throne, and a sincere and courageous man. But before all of that, he was a bastard, a second-class family member raised in Winterfell by the Stark family. Although being equally talented as his brother Robb, he didn't want to become a Knight of Winterfell. Instead, he voluntarily wanted to join his uncle into the Night's Watch, which was also seen as a punishment. In the Night's Watch, he found his own authentic path, going through his hero's journey. There, he evolved into a respected leader. In this video, we will outline his personality and his shadow, how he was able to overcome the identification as a bastard, and how everything is linked closely to his identity as the legitimate son of a Stark and Targaryen. Jon was raised as a bastard by the Stark family. Ned Stark, his alleged father, raised him very well. He always treated him like a normal Stark family member. Jon Snow was loved and respected by everyone except for Catelyn and Sansa. He was talented and well trained with the sword, being able to go head-to-head with his childhood rival, Robb Stark. Although being talented and trained, Jon dreamed of going to the Night's Watch, which is very odd for someone with his abilities. He could have tried to become a knight, side by side being with his brother Robb, or also going with Ned, Sansa and Arya to King's Landing, which all seemed more promising than joining the Night's Watch. But he wanted to join his uncle Benjen Stark, and Jon did as he planned. At Winterfell, before joining the Night's Watch, Jon being a bastard had always been a resonating theme, which he obviously didn't like. The overall status as a bastard in the world of Game of Thrones is almost always negative. Not being a full family member, with most often an unknown prostitute as a mother, defined the personalities of bastards. Catelyn Stark, for example, projected the hatred she felt towards Ned for allegedly cheating on her onto Jon Snow, which he had to deal with, even though it wasn't his fault. In general, it can be assumed that there was a lot of whispering behind his back about his status as a lower-class family member, which defined his perception of himself and the other Stark members. An example is his first conversation with Tyrion Lannister. Jon got triggered as soon as Tyrion talked about him being a bastard. Jon Snow reached the Night's Watch. He started off arrogant. During his first training, it became clear that he was by far the best fighter among the newcomers. Jon Snow basically played with them and became arrogant, until he was humbled by Tyrion. He explained that these are rather poor, untalented criminals who have never held a sword. Only because of his professional training at Winterfell, he had an advantage. It's a crucial turning point for Jon's character. Only then he started to teach his future comrades about what he had already learned, starting to become a leader. Jon sticked to his decision and became a man of the Night's Watch. There, he went through his own hero journey. He found many friends, became a highly respected member, was planned to one day become the leader, and always backed up what he was taught by his father and what he thought to be right. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. With Sir Alliser, Jon Snow had a personal enemy inside the Night's Watch. Alliser disliked Jon Snow from the very beginning. There was a constant tension between them. They teased each other at almost every possible moment. In the end, however, Jon was able to assert himself without becoming devious or dishonorable. Jon became the legitimate leader not by intrigues or manipulation, but by being strong, responsible, and courageous. Now it's the right time to ask, what was the shadow of Jon Snow? Jon identified too strongly with the bastard image, which deeply influenced his perception of himself and especially the choices he made. Why in the world would someone like him, with his skills, looks, and origin, go to the Night's Watch? If you once become a man of the Night's Watch, you basically kill off so many opportunities that it is generally seen as a punishment. Usually there is no comeback. It's a vow to death, without great career opportunities or family opportunities. You must live a celibate life until death. One might argue that he was impressed by his uncle Benjen and wanted to follow his footsteps. But even Benjen wasn't enthusiastic about Jon's dream. The only plausible reason I can think of why Jon was so determined about joining the Night's Watch is that he didn't consider himself worthy of being a knight or anything else promising, because the outside world constantly reminded him that he was a bastard, and therefore less valuable than normal family members. Especially the disapproval of Catelyn Stark, who, as I said earlier, projected her grief towards Ned onto Jon, was probably the biggest reminder of him being a bastard. There are many similarities to Tyrion Lannister. His father, Tywin, also projected his grief about the death of his wife onto Tyrion, even though Tyrion couldn't have done anything as a baby. Tyrion was also constantly reminded of being a lower-class family member because of his disability. Cersei, for example, never held back about their mother's cause of death. With the exception of Jaime, for a very long time, there was no one who valued Tyrion for the human he was. The respect and recognition Tyrion got was mostly linked to his family name. Jon was a bastard, and therefore treated like a criminal in comparison to his siblings, and he adopted that view. That's why it fits for him to go to the Night's Watch. Tyrion also felt like a criminal, as he revealed in his trial.
I'm guilty of a far more monstrous crime. I'm guilty of being a dwarf.
And just like Jon, he was treated as a criminal for things he had no control over. In contrast to Tyrion, Jon was less conscious about how the inferiority he felt influenced his decisions. So Jon's shadow was his identification with his false identity. Because as we know, he isn't the bastard of Ned Stark. In reality, he's the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen. Now we know that Jon unconsciously saw himself as a criminal. At the Night's Watch, he was surrounded by other criminals. And although there were still moments in which he was teased for his identity by, for example, Alyssa, it overall became less relevant, because there everyone had their own burden to bear. Nearly everyone at the Night's Watch was either a convicted criminal or, like Jon and Tyrion, was treated like a criminal. Therefore, Jon was able to blossom. Because in that environment his feelings of inferiority weren't as present as they were in Winterfell. Jon always remained true to himself. As he developed at the Night's Watch, we were able to see the influence of Ned Stark. Jon religiously held on to the teachings of Ned, but sometimes he decided to follow his own moral compass. As for example in his relationship with Ygritte. The vow to not be intimate with women seemed silly or unimportant for him. Therefore he broke it. But Jon didn't betray the Night's Watch for her. He left her to reunite with his people, ultimately being forced to fight against her. Jon genuinely loved Ygritte, but he still followed what he thought to be more important. He remained true to himself. I want to elaborate on what I mean by Jon being true to himself. As counterexamples, I will take Jaime, Littlefinger, and the Hound, aka Xandor. One might say that Jaime and Littlefinger were also true to themselves, but that's completely different and not comparable to Jon. because Jaime's highest priority was the benefit of his family and especially the safety and wishes of his twin sister. Jaime did everything, no matter how morally corrupt, just to get the best out of the situation. Jaime threw Bran from the tower, which caused his disability and coma, just so his relationship with his twin sister remained a secret. One time Jaime murdered his distant cousin, just so he got a chance to escape. Jaime's love for Tyrion and his interest in Brienne were the few bright spots on his journey to actually oppose his father and sister. It took the threat of undead White Walkers for Jaime to find something which is worth dying for beyond the benefit of his family and sister. Sandor did terrible things. He killed the childhood friend of Arya, and he murdered countless people as Joffrey's direct subordinate. When Arya confronted him with his atrocities, he said that he had to follow orders, which is very paradox, because he left the Kingsguard because he refused to listen to Joffrey. Sandor didn't leave because he developed a similar value system as Jon. It was because he was scared of fire. His fear for fire was greater than his fear for the consequences for not obeying the king. At that point, he didn't even have the realization about his responsibility. During his arc with Arya, they developed a father-daughter relationship, and he genuinely started to care for her. Like Jon, he began to do what he thought to be right, no longer blindly following orders. Unfortunately, he was unable to outgrow or integrate his desire for revenge, which ultimately killed him. From the beginning, Jon didn't have to learn the same lessons as Sandor or Jaime. Jon already knew that there are greater things than the benefits of his own family, which is worth dying for. Or that he doesn't have to blindly follow orders, and that it's more important to do what you think is right. Jon eliminated Daenerys because she was corrupted by her rage and frustration. Littlefinger is even worse, because in contrast to Sandor and Jaime, he didn't do any progress at all. Littlefinger is the definition of an opportunistic, money and power-hungry manipulator, ready to sacrifice everything except his own life to become the most influential person. I don't see anything Littlefinger would give his life for. In return, he basically started everything. Littlefinger was the Toji of Game of Thrones. He was responsible for countless deaths, just so he could use the chaos to climb up the ladder. What makes Littlefinger so much more dangerous is his ability to swallow humiliations. He can tank them temporarily, knowing well that in the long run he will make them repay. There isn't a drop of morality inside Littlefinger. Jon being true to himself means his belief in his values which exceed the rational explanations of earthly life. It's his belief in the transcendent, so to say, beyond the mere fights of power and influence, which is the main theme in Game of Thrones. Jon made many irrational decisions, for example breaking the tradition of the Night's Watch and form an alliance with the Wildlings. After he betrayed the Wildlings and killed many of them in the Great Battle, he still decided to go by himself for negotiations. Jon acknowledged the danger of the White Walkers, and therefore wanted to team up with the Wildlings. Or, even though he was aware of the power of Daenerys and that the North needs her help to defeat the White Walkers, at first he refused to acknowledge her as his queen, backing up his position as the King of the North. Jon always remained true to himself, doing what he thought to be right, no matter how unreasonable his decisions seemed to outsiders. He is the almost complete opposite of Littlefinger. Jon Snow's path of becoming a leader is the antidote to the Game of Thrones. At the Night's Watch, Jon gained immense respect, not by being strategic or manipulative, but with courage and bravery. He befriended the outsiders, taught them to fight, always fought courageously and rightfully gained the acknowledgement he deserved. Now the following question. How did Jon integrate his shadow? Him becoming the leader of the Night's Watch and the way he became it shows how he was able to integrate his shadow. Jon didn't confront the feeling of inferiority caused by his identity as a bastard. He outgrew it by living his true self. although he reduced himself of being a bastard, he acted out the opposite. It's a very interesting dynamic, because usually it's the other way around. People push themselves by what they are thinking about themselves without being able to back it up with their actions. As for example, Janos Slint. He loudly bragged about him being an ex-member of the Gold Cloaks and how strong and tough he was. But when it came down to it, he hid in the same room with Gilly and her baby. Jon fought as he had no fear of dying. He protected his people, gave commands, and was prepared to fight to the bitter end, which left a lasting impression on his comrades. Although being the new leader of the Night's Watch, he was lured into an ambush and murdered by his own people. After he resurrected, he made his final move to punish all the people who betrayed him, and then left the Night's Watch, because his watch was over. Afterwards, he continued where he left off. The main reason why he was voted to be the King of the North was because of his win against Ramsay Bolton. Jon wasn't as insecure about his identity as a bastard as before he joined the Night's Watch. Ramsay multiple times tried to provoke Jon, but Jon's rage was primarily because Ramsay threatened to hurt Rickon and Sansa. After Jon's win over Ramsay, the people around him came to the same realization he had already made, namely that actions carry more weight than one's own name. I don't want to downplay the fact that even as a bastard, Jon still had Stark blood inside him, which still was an important factor for him becoming King of the North. Nonetheless, it is still a miracle, because usually a legitimate family member is always preferred over a bastard. But Jon has shown that there is another way. At the end we saw for Jon his true identity as Aegon Targaryen became more of a burden than a relief. It made his situation much more complicated, because for him personally he didn't need to know more about his true self, because he was already living it. He didn't want to become the new king, and he also didn't want people to address him by his real name either. The only important factor for him was to break up with Daenerys, because she was his biological aunt. Jon's reaction shows how irrelevant his origin has become to him. If we compare it to a possible reaction Jon would have had at the beginning of Game of Thrones, it would probably be completely different. He would have been much happier, and probably he would have also made other choices. His insecurity would likely swung the other way, and maybe he would have strongly identified as a Targaryen, gaining false pride as a compensation for his low-kept self-esteem, and so on. Since Jon was humbled by Tyrion at his start at the Night's Watch, Jon made immense progress. Although he was taught that he was a bastard of Winterfell, namely Jon Snow, he always acted like Aegon Targaryen, the legitimate union of ice and fire. Thank you for watching the video. If everything goes according to plan, the next video will be a shadow video about Walter White. Maybe there will be more content about Game of Thrones. I thought about a possible shadow video of Jaime, pointing out why and where he failed to integrate his shadow, but that's further in the future. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and write your opinion in the comments, and hopefully see you soon.